Hello everybody. I made a final interview project to show my class and the whole world about death in Korea. In this final project, I interviewed an old friend who is partners with my father at his own business. His name is SKO. He is from South Korea. My dad and SK have factories in Busan, South Korea. These buildings make metal castings and winches for machinery. These parts are shipped through Nabrico barges and brought to the Nabrico warehouse in Nashville, Tennessee. SK is at his older ages, so I could not FaceTime him because of his lower hearing ability. SK has a family who lives in a compound near Busan. SK lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and owns the building where the office headquarters are. There are generally different death encounters with Koreans and death. There is age-adjusted death rates that are approximately 3.9% lower per 1,000 deaths. The most common cause of death in Asian culture is cancer and heart disease. For Asians, there is generally 6% suicide and homicide. For Asians, death-related practices also use the oldest male as a decision maker for the family care. Asians think that remarriage and dating after a death of a spouse is appropriate. Asians also decorate their graves with a paper house along with the burning of money. The funeral party later retires to a longevity banquet to gain support and reintegration for the mourners. Asian Americans also believe in the connection between the living and the deceased. Members of the family visit grave sites occasionally to remember the presence of the lost one. Is everything I learned about the Death and Dying book with Asian cultures and dying. There is much more with different countries on how they celebrate death. Along with traditions, there are different practices, attitudes, death-related language, and much more. When I interviewed SKO through an email, I asked him 6 questions. He briefly and extensively answered by emailing the questions, and he sent me a reply for every question in long answers. The first question I asked is, what attitudes does Korea have towards death? SK mentioned as an alternative to traditional burial methods. Law passed about removing grave sites and the burial of a loved one after 60 years of burial with dead bodies in the year 2000. This law is made because of dwindling graveyard space. Because of this resulting law, cremation has become much more popular. Families do not always opt for ashes. Several companies get compressed remains of the dead body into gem-like bead color, turquoise, pink, or black. These are death beads that are displayed in the dead loved one's home. For a brief answer, I asked SK if there is any words or symbols that are in death-related language that symbolize any way of dying or death in Korean culture. K answered, there are 4 deemed unlucky in Korea because it sounds like the Chinese word for death. In other cultures, this refers to the number 4 in Sino-Korean numbers and is pronounced sa, white and black colors of death. On with this interview, I asked a basic question with the longest answer. Do you know of any death rituals or funerals that your culture does to celebrate or remember the passing of a loved one or important person? Is there any practices made in funeral that is unique to your culture? SK answered that the dead body stays in the house for 3 to 7 days. One of the relatives would take a coat of the deceased to the roof and call the dead's name 3 times before the coat was taken back as a cover for the corpse to conduct the ritual kobak. The family of the dead will prepare 3 bowls each of rice, vegetables, soups, and set out 3 units of money and 3 pairs of shoes outside the entrance of the house to the messengers from the other world. His son will go find a tomb in a mountain, and his wife will be responsible for the food for the funeral. The relatives of the family will come help make arrangements and cook food for the guests. The corpse will be washed in incense water and dressed in grave clothes. Plugging cotton in the ears and nose of the dead and placing coins over the eyes, the mouth will be filled with 3 spoonfuls of rice. The body will be bound from head to foot with shrouds of 7 layers and put in a coffin. This is bound in 3 places by long strips of cloth with a mattress under the body. A blanket will cover the body, and the deceased's clothes will fill in other spaces. To add more, I asked Mr. O if there is any unique grief and mourning done in death with anyone, or any special types of grief and mourning in your culture. Brief versus prolonged, open versus private, or expression of emotion. K answered very extensively that many Korean traditional ceremonies are influenced by the Confucian culture. Should be mourning for 3 years, during which time just the ceremonies must be held. When the parents died, it reflects their falal. In general, the female family members must keep weeping and behave like they are grieving. People think this performance can prove the importance and value of the deceased. However, men are not allowed to cry at the funeral. They must control their emotions. The situation makes them emotional. In traditional Korean culture, the image of the male should be rational and calm, and female is emotional and sensitive. Therefore, the male must restrain his sadness. Relatives and friends will write a funeral oration to mourn the deceased and express their grief. It only details the life of the deceased, but also praise his merits and achievements. It will reflect the culture and history of the whole family of the deceased. The oration is very formal. It can be written as a biography, epitaph, or a letter to the deceased. For another question, I asked if there are any unique spiritual or religious beliefs about death associated with Korean culture. SK answered, in religious beliefs, Koreans have been inclusive rather than exclusive in their religious beliefs, and the majority of them have opted for expressing no religious preference. Because of this, it is a difficulty for anyone to get an accurate religious census of Korea. Polytheistic shamanism and other animistic beliefs appear to be the oldest forms of religion. Back to the prehistoric time, South Korea has a great diversity of religious traditions. South Korea has a great diversity of religious traditions, including Buddhism, Confucianism, Chandogyo, Christianity, and as many as 300 new religious sects. Religious practitioners in shamanism is performed by shamans, most of whom are women, by holding shamanistic ritual cut in order to gain good fortune for clients, cure illness by exhorting evil spirits, or appropriate local or village gods. Shamans formerly were the low social status and were victims of discrimination. With growing nationalism and dances, songs, and incantations of cut have been revitalized. Buddhism is experiencing a modernization movement. Mountain. Buddhism is changing toward community Buddhism, and temple-centered Buddhism is turning into socially relevant Buddhism. Accordingly, the role of monks goes beyond the religious sphere, and their worldly possessions are also modernized. Families in South Korea observe the Confucian practice of honoring their dead ancestors and anniversaries of their death days. New Year's Day and other holidays such as Hansik, the 105th day after the winter solstice, and Chuseok, the 15th day of the 8th lunar month. People conduct ritual and ceremonies in honor of Confucius each spring and autumn at the Confucian shrines. Shamans can hold the ceremony cut at their client's request. Buddhists pray day and night on Buddha's birthday, the 8th day of April, the lunar month. This is often followed by a street parade in the cities. Christians celebrate Christmas Day in their churches. Both of these days are national holidays. I asked SK if there is any social support that is family-oriented or any other way. SK answered, Koreans who observe ancestor worship believe that death is not a final termination, but a transformation. In Korean folk belief, Death means a departure from this world to the other world. The other world is not necessarily located far away from this world, but may be over the mountains. Death is thought to be the rite of passage, and the dead are generally considered to be similar to the living. Elaborate ancestor worship rites offering various foods as to a living person spring out of these beliefs. For a cultural comparison, our culture is different in honoring the dead. Unlike South Korea, it is not as serious because we do not bury a body in a mattress or turn the ashes into relevant jewelry. Our culture does not believe that dead bodies need as much symbolism, and just make a meal for a funeral and burn or bury a dead body. The most surprising thing to me is storing the dead body indoors for a week in a house in Korea. It would be hard for me to do because of the bad odors that I can imagine a dead body would have. The funeral is not as diverse in my culture, with only one day, and men can cry at our funerals for grief. We both burn dead bodies for ashes. I think our culture does not do enough to honor the dead. Yet it is good we all know our loved ones and our memories. Here is an image of a Korean funeral passed by SKO.